learning. When I was working in London at the Institute of Education together with Günter Kress, we used to discuss this notion of learning very often. And the main reason was frustration, because in the Institute of Education, not too many people were actually thinking about learning as a fundamental given. Yeah. There was a lot of work on what we could call the didactics of a classroom, information circulation, but learning itself was hardly ever addressed. So we did a lot of brainstorming about it, and Günther at one point came up with this idea of moments of learning. So the question was, is there a way in which we can observe learning? And how can we look at learning in an robust way? Okay, for instance, ethnographically, can we establish learning as an object that can be observed, that can be examined in detail and an actual occurrence? Now, before I go on here, I need to make another remark. I mean, it's only half related, but was a thing, of course, that Günther and I also shared. Let me refer to old Emil Durkheim, well, he wrote a book about education. It wasn't the only one, but the title of his book was interestingly Moral Education. So in the view of Durkheim, education and learning was not only about what we would call information or knowledge, all right, content. And in that sense, it's an important qualification that we need to bring to contemporary, discourses about education and how it must be measured. Most of these approaches to education reduce it exactly to information, to knowledge, to propositions, all right, that need to be acquired to a certain degree. Okay. The argument that Emil Durkheim and others built, also thinking about Dewey, is that education and learning always involves vastly more than that. In the sense that it involves the acquisition of norms. Norms that are social or social-cultural, if you wish. And through learning and through the learning of norms, we become recognizable to others. Right? It is because the stuff we acquire, we learn, right, is normative, that others can recognize it as learning or as learned. Right? It's a very important qualification. It's a normative, and as a consequence, the shared, the collective, the recognizable, and the meaningful dimension of learning that we have to keep in mind. And now to the point. Moments of learning. The thing, Günther and I began to see was that yes, you can observe learning. You can observe it in, well, we used to call it every first instance of anything. So every first moment that we as humans do something that we have never done before. And that can be the use of a word. Think of a student in a classroom and me lecturing about, for instance, intertextuality, a technical word, all right, unknown to the student before we had the lecture, but by the time the student leaves the lecture room, he or she knows that word, intertextuality, and he or she will be able to use it knowledgeably, i.e. normatively. And it is that first moment in which the normative dimension, the shared meaning of particular things becomes overt and becomes accessible and also becomes enactable to people as a moment of learning. I give the example of learning a word. It can also be, the first time you take a plane the first time you apply for a residence permit, the first time you go to jail, the first time you need to see a lawyer, and so on and so on and so on. So if you observe the first instance of anything, that ranks within this huge category of social activities, we are observing a moment of learning. I think this creates for research a magnificent object. We don't nearly do enough work, for instance ethnographic work, on moments of learning. Now, needless to say that these moments of learning occur both in a formal learning environment like the classroom, but also in informal learning environments, like for instance the online world, when people start using memes or learn how to use particular forms of expression, acronyms, abbreviations, that are very widespread on Twitter, for instance, and are also learning how to understand them. Each of these first instances is a moment of learning in which we will see, on the one hand, knowledge or information or a particular bit of stuff, all right, but also the rules of using and handling that stuff, their normative dimension. And it is the confluence of these two, I think, that creates a hugely interesting research object. It's high time we engage with it.